scare you. Well, if it ain't my little buddy Benny, I think I'll kill you.
Think of my children.
You don't have any children.
Someday I might.
Shut up. So you're the one who's leading the American. Where is the man? And the key. Where is the key?
The key? The key? What key?
It looks to me like I've got all the horses!
Hey, Benny! Looks to me like you're on the wrong side of the river!
Now that serves you right.
Go ahead. It's someone brought off our American brethren. I thought you might need it.
The legs were missing. Compartment she hidden somewhere inside here.
Don't put me down for mummification.
Likewise.
Who was talking about it? What?
The man on the barge, the one with the hook, he's looking for a key.
It's mine.
The first great collapse in the mummy is not a temple, a city wall, or an ancient monument. It is a line of library shelves. Evelyn Carnahan tries to place one book where it belongs, loses control of the arrangement, and turns a carefully ordered room into chaos. The moment is played as physical comedy, yet it also introduces the idea that quietly drives the entire movie. Evelyn cannot leave the past undisturbed. Here at Cinema Deep View, that makes her curiosity more than a charming character trait. It becomes the adventure's most creative and dangerous force. Evelyn enters the story surrounded by knowledge, but denied the authority she believes she deserves. She can read what others cannot, recognize the significance of neglected objects, and imagine possibilities beyond the museum's routines. At the same time, intelligence does not make her cautious. It gives her stronger reasons to open doors that experience might have taught someone else to leave closed. The film does not present this contradiction as a flaw to be corrected. It treats the combination of expertise and recklessness as the spark its world needs. That choice immediately changes the shape of the adventure. A more conventional version could have made Rick O'Connell the unquestioned center, with Evelyn following him into danger and supplying information when the plot required it. Instead, Rick possesses the practical skills of survival while Evelyn determines why the journey happens at all. He knows how to move through immediate danger. She recognizes which forgotten mystery is worth approaching. Their abilities do not simply complement each other. They represent two competing relationships with the unknown. Rick has already learned that certain places punish confidence. His instincts are built around escape, improvisation, and staying alive when a plan collapses. Evelyn sees the same uncertainty as an invitation. To her, an unread inscription or buried chamber is not merely a warning. It is a gap in human understanding. The attraction between them develops inside that disagreement. One is repeatedly measuring the cost of going forward, while the other is measuring the cost of turning back without an answer. This tension helps the mummy shift between horror, comedy, romance, and adventure without feeling as though four separate films have been stitched together. Curiosity connects those tones. It creates suspense when a forbidden space is approached, comedy when confidence outruns coordination, romance when two incompatible temperaments begin to respect each other, and spectacle when the ancient world refuses to remain safely ancient. The genres change, but the motivating impulse remains recognizable. The film's 1920s setting strengthens that idea. Museums, expeditions, maps, translations, and competing treasure hunters all promise that history can be collected and controlled. The past appears to be something modern people can label, display, sell, or convert into personal glory, yet the movie keeps disturbing that confidence. Knowledge opens roots, but it does not guarantee wisdom. Reading a warning is different from respecting it, just as discovering a place is different from understanding what a person is entitled to take from it. That distinction gives Evelyn's curiosity its double edge. Without her determination, there is no meaningful expedition and no emotional reason to care about what is found. With it, barriers that once protected the present begin to fail. The same quality that makes her compelling also makes safety impossible. The movie invites us to admire her hunger for knowledge while letting us feel the consequences of knowledge pursued without sufficient restraint. So the deeper question is not simply whether curiosity is good or dangerous. The Mummy makes it both at once. The more revealing question is this: how does the film make Evelyn's curiosity the force that unleashes its danger, while also making that curiosity the reason the adventure is worth following? Answering it means looking beyond who defeats which threat. It means examining who gives the story motion, how the film turns incompatible tones into a shared rhythm, and why its central relationship depends on two people who interpret risk in completely different ways. This perspective also asks us to reconsider what kind of movie The Mummy first appears to be. Its monsters, chases, ruins, and supernatural threats are easy to recognize. Beneath them is a conflict between preservation and disturbance, caution and discovery, survival and the desire to know. The film rarely pauses to explain that conflict directly. It places the argument inside movement, performance, production design, and the changing balance between Evelyn and Rick. Before following that argument into the story's machinery, we need to establish the film's immediate character. What experience does The Mummy actually offer when its horror imagery, romantic energy, broad humor, and old-fashioned adventure spirit first meet? That first read will reveal whether these competing qualities support the same journey or merely compete for our attention. On first contact, The Mummy feels less like a horror film interrupted by jokes than an adventure that borrows horror's imagery to give its pleasures a sharper edge. The title carries the weight of Universal's monster tradition, inviting expectations of tombs, curses, shadows, and a creature returning from death. Stephen Sommers keeps those elements, but he changes the audience's relationship with them. Fear is present, yet the film's dominant promise is motion. It wants us leaning forward in anticipation, not shrinking away in dread. That distinction establishes the movie's personality almost immediately. Its ancient prologue is solemn, heightened, and visually severe. Once the story reaches the 20th century, the rhythm becomes looser and the characters more playful. The shift could have felt like a refusal to take the opening seriously. Instead, it teaches us how to watch everything that follows. The supernatural threat can carry real consequences, while the people confronting it remain funny, impatient, vain, romantic, or completely unprepared. The resulting experience belongs to a tradition of large-scale adventure in which danger is designed to be enjoyed from a safe distance. Geography matters. Objects carry histories. A map can create as much forward momentum as a weapon, and a half-understood inscription can be more consequential than physical strength. The world feels broad enough to contain lost places and old secrets, yet simple enough for the audience to understand what each new destination promises. That clarity allows the film to move quickly without making its mythology feel entirely arbitrary. Its strongest immediate quality is tonal confidence. The Mummy rarely apologizes for moving from grotesque imagery to verbal sparring or from a supernatural attack to a romantic beat. Those transitions work because the performances remain grounded in consistent personalities. Brendan Fraser gives Rick physical credibility without turning him into an invulnerable machine. Rachel Weisz lets Evelyn be knowledgeable, awkward, stubborn, and increasingly courageous without treating those qualities as separate versions of the character. John Hannah's Jonathan contributes opportunism and comic disorder, but his behavior still grows from recognizable self-interest. The chemistry among them gives the spectacle a human scale. Rick and Evelyn do not simply exchange attraction on a schedule, they evaluate each other through action. She gradually sees intelligence inside his rough practicality, while he discovers that her apparent lack of field experience conceals a deeper form of bravery. Jonathan complicates their dynamic by responding to danger according to whatever seems most profitable or survivable at that second. Their contrasting instincts turn ordinary movement through the plot into a source of personality. This is also why the movie remains approachable when its imagery becomes darker. The audience is rarely left alone with dread for very long. A reaction, interruption, or change in pace releases the pressure before it becomes oppressive. That approach will appeal to viewers who enjoy supernatural concepts but do not necessarily want sustained horror. It may frustrate anyone hoping for a slow, claustrophobic treatment of an ancient curse. The film values exhilaration more than unease, even when it briefly proves that it can create both. The first meaningful reservation grows from the same strength. Tonal flexibility can become tonal protection. Because humor and momentum arrive so reliably, some danger loses weight before its consequences have time to settle. Supporting figures can feel less like people than pieces arranged for a chase, a scare, or a joke. The film knows exactly how to keep its surface alive, but it is not always equally interested in the emotional residue left behind when the excitement moves elsewhere. Its depiction of Egypt also belongs unmistakably to an older adventure tradition. The setting is presented through romanticized ruins, colonial-era institutions, treasure-seeking outsiders, mystical guardians, and broad cultural shorthand. Within the movie's heightened design, these elements create instant readability. From a wider modern perspective, that readability comes at the cost of complexity. Egypt often functions as a magnificent storehouse of danger and wonder for foreign protagonists to enter, interpret, and disturb. Recognizing that limitation does not erase the film's craft, but it prevents atmosphere from being mistaken for historical depth. Visually, the movie offers a mixture of tactile sets, expressive lighting, physical stunt work, and digital effects from a period when computer-generated spectacle was becoming central to blockbuster filmmaking. Some effects now announce their age more clearly than others. Yet technical smoothness is not the only measure of whether an image works. Many sequences succeed because composition, sound, performance, and pacing sell the idea around the effect. We respond to the escalating situation before we have time to inspect every digital surface. Jerry Goldsmith's score contributes heavily to that confidence. It does not treat the journey as a small or ironic event. The music grants scale to landscapes, danger to supernatural movement, and emotional lift to discoveries that might otherwise function as simple plot information. This sincerity is important. The characters may joke, but the filmmaking does not mock the desire for adventure itself. The movie believes that a hidden city, an unreadable text, or an approaching threat can still produce uncomplicated cinematic excitement. That belief identifies the audience most likely to connect with the film. It speaks to viewers who enjoy clear characters, romantic friction, accessible mythology, energetic action, and horror imagery delivered without relentless severity. It asks for comfort with broad comedy and pulp logic. Viewers seeking archaeological realism, cultural nuance, restrained performances, or carefully limited supernatural rules may find its confidence excessive. The movie is generous with incident, but it is not especially interested in understatement. The first read, then, reveals a film whose apparent mixture is more organized than it initially seems. Horror supplies danger, romance supplies vulnerability, comedy keeps the characters socially alive, adventure gives every other tone a direction in which to travel. The remaining question is how that organization works beneath the surface. Momentum alone cannot sustain a journey of this size. To understand why the film keeps advancing without collapsing under its own ingredients, we have to locate the story engine and identify exactly which desires keep turning it. The story engine is built from two desires moving toward the same buried world from opposite directions. Evelyn wants to uncover the past because she believes knowledge should be recovered and understood. Imhotep wants to reclaim the past because he refuses to accept that time has taken anything from him. One desire appears generous and intellectually alive. The other becomes possessive and destructive. Their methods and moral limits are profoundly different, yet both characters disturb boundaries that were created to keep history from returning. Evelyn's immediate problem is smaller than an ancient curse. She has knowledge without status. Her ability with languages and artifacts has not earned her the professional recognition she wants, partly because her enthusiasm exceeds her discipline. The museum contains the world she loves, but her position within it keeps her close to discovery without allowing her to become a discoverer. This frustration matters because it gives her a reason to treat an uncertain opportunity as more valuable than personal safety. That opportunity arrives through the object Jonathan brings to her. It appears modest, but its concealed information points toward Hamunaptra, the lost city Rick once encountered under catastrophic circumstances. The map does not merely provide a destination. It converts Evelyn's private ambition into a possible expedition. Once she believes the city can be found, remaining in the museum would mean choosing security over the chance to prove that her knowledge can accomplish something outside its walls. The screenplay makes her commitment active. Rick is not a heroic stranger who arrives and recruits her. He is imprisoned, vulnerable, and nearly out of options when Evelyn recognizes that his experience can guide her to the city. She intervenes to secure his release because he is useful to the goal she has already chosen. This reverses the expected introduction of an adventure hero. Rick may possess the physical capability, but Evelyn creates the mission that gives his capability a direction. Rick's central want initially appears simpler. He wants to survive, regain his freedom, and benefit from returning to a place he barely escaped. Unlike Evelyn, he has no romantic illusion that unexplored territory is waiting politely to be understood. Hamunaptra represents danger before it represents knowledge. His decision to return is therefore practical rather than visionary. The expedition offers money, movement, and an alternative to remaining trapped. He enters the journey through necessity, while Evelyn enters through desire. Their different motivations create the relationship that keeps the plot alive. Evelyn needs Rick's experience but resists his casual attitude toward history. Rick respects her intelligence before he fully trusts her judgment. Each can identify the other's weakness more easily than their own. She sees his skepticism as a lack of imagination. He sees her determination as an inability to recognize when information becomes dangerous. Their attraction gains energy from the fact that neither person can complete the journey alone, yet neither is willing to surrender control of it. The other travelers broaden this conflict by carrying their own definitions of value. Jonathan is drawn toward treasure and opportunity. The rival American expedition is similarly focused on material reward and the prestige of arriving first. Evelyn wants proof, access, and discovery. Rick wants the group to remain alive long enough for any reward to matter. The characters can travel toward the same location while effectively pursuing different versions of Hamunaptra. That arrangement creates conflict without requiring anyone to abandon the central route. The city itself functions as an obstacle built from incomplete understanding. It is difficult to reach, difficult to navigate, and protected by people who know that its apparent wealth conceals a larger threat. Their warnings could end the adventure if everyone accepted them immediately, so the screenplay gives each group a reason to interpret caution as competition, superstition, or intimidation. The obstacle is therefore not only physical danger. It is the characters' confidence that they understand what kind of story they have entered. This is where the movie's adventure form becomes especially useful. A horror film might isolate the characters and emphasize their helplessness from the beginning. The Mummy first gives them the pleasures of an expedition. There is travel, rivalry, romantic friction, excavation, and the promise of a spectacular find. The audience is allowed to enjoy the same forward pull that motivates Evelyn. When the consequences emerge, the film has already made curiosity feel rewarding. We cannot condemn the impulse without recognizing that we shared it. The rival expedition gives that curiosity a visible clock. If Evelyn's group hesitates, someone else may reach the discovery first. Competition turns patience into apparent failure and encourages decisions that would otherwise seem unnecessarily reckless. It also divides information among characters. One party may possess an object, another may understand a symbol, and someone else may know the terrain. The plot advances because no single person controls every piece required to see the danger clearly. Objects perform unusually important narrative work. The map creates direction. The key-like puzzle box grants access. Ancient books preserve knowledge, but do not distinguish between information that liberates and information that destroys. Each object answers one question while creating another. This produces momentum without relying entirely on random attacks. The characters pursue something concrete, obtain it, misunderstand part of its function, and discover that possession has changed the problem rather than solved it. Evelyn's reading from the recovered book becomes the choice that fully locks her into the supernatural story. It can be viewed as a disastrous mistake, but the film has prepared the decision through her entire characterization. She is a reader standing before a text no living scholar expects to possess. Asking her not to open, it would mean asking her to reject the quality that defines her. The action releases a threat, yet it is not arbitrary foolishness inserted to move the plot. It is curiosity reaching its most consequential expression. At that point, the cost of failure expands. Evelyn is no longer risking professional embarrassment or a failed expedition. The awakened Imhotep begins rebuilding his power, and the effects of his return extend beyond the people who disturbed the site. The screenplay makes his recovery visible enough to function as an escalating clock. Delay benefits him. Every unsuccessful attempt to understand or stop him allows the threat to become more capable, while the group's available options grow narrower. Imhotep's desire gives that escalation emotional form. He is not driven only by hunger for power or indiscriminate destruction. His larger aim is restoration. He wants to reverse an ancient loss and complete what history interrupted. That motive does not excuse what he does, but it prevents him from functioning as an empty obstacle. Like Evelyn, he treats the past as unfinished. The moral separation lies in what each is willing to sacrifice. Evelyn endangers others through overconfidence, then confronts responsibility. Imhotep treats other lives as materials for his private correction of history. This parallel keeps the story from becoming a simple contest between modern heroes and an ancient monster. Both sides use knowledge to reopen what was closed. Both depend on texts, objects, and buried systems. The conflict is partly about which relationship with history will prevail. Can the past be studied without being possessed? Can love for what has been lost remain love when it demands the removal of every boundary? The adventure does not stop to frame these questions academically. It embeds them in pursuit. Rick's motivation also changes as the consequences become personal. Survival remains his strongest instinct, but escape is no longer enough once Evelyn's choices place her in direct danger. His practical competence begins serving a responsibility he did not have when the expedition started. This development is important because the film does not ask him to become intellectually fascinated by the past. He changes through attachment. Evelyn gives the journey purpose, while Rick gradually gives that purpose a human limit. Their partnership creates a repeating movement. Evelyn identifies the larger objective, Rick manages the immediate obstacle, and each discovers that the other's solution has created a new demand. Knowledge without action would leave the group trapped. Action without knowledge would send them moving in the wrong direction. The screenplay repeatedly separates those abilities and then forces them back together. Romantic chemistry emerges from narrative dependency, which is why their relationship can advance even when the plot is moving too quickly for extended intimacy. Benny provides a darker variation on Rick's adaptability. He also reads danger quickly and knows how to attach himself to whoever appears most powerful. The difference is that his flexibility serves only self-preservation. Rick's improvisation gradually expands to protect other people, while Benny's contracts inward until every relationship becomes a temporary bargain. This contrast allows the film to test heroism without making Rick suddenly noble in every respect. The relevant question is not who feels fear, but what fear persuades each person to protect. Momentum comes from the screenplay's refusal to let a solution remain stable. Reaching the city begins the real danger. Finding an object creates a struggle over its use. Deciphering information reveals that more information is required. Escaping one location does not end the threat because the characters have carried its consequences with them. This design creates a chain of cause and effect. The story may depend on coincidence and broad pulp logic, but its major turns usually grow from a desire already established. The engine is not flawless. Rules are sometimes explained at the speed required by the chase, and characters occasionally find the necessary clue with remarkable convenience. The rapid alternation between threat and comedy can prevent a setback from gaining its full emotional weight. Yet the central causal structure remains strong because the characters are rarely moved by plot alone. Evelyn advances through curiosity, Rick through survival and attachment, Jonathan through opportunity, Benny through self-interest, and Imhotep through an obsession with restoration. As the pursuit begins to narrow around ancient knowledge and the possibility of countering what has been awakened, the film approaches its decisive turns. The ending does not need to be reached yet to see what the engine demands. Each character will be pressed toward the limit of the desire that brought them here. Curiosity must encounter responsibility. Survival must decide whether another person is worth the risk. Love must be separated from possession. The next question is what those pressures reveal when choice becomes more expensive than intention. Pressure does not transform Evelyn into a completely different person. It reveals which parts of her intelligence are mature and which parts are still seeking permission to matter. Her visible goal is discovery. She wants to find Hamunaptra, prove its historical reality, and demonstrate that her scholarly abilities can accomplish more than arranging another person's collection. Beneath that ambition is a less visible need. Evelyn wants to trust her own authority without constantly measuring it against the approval of institutions or more experienced men. Her fear is not simply failure, it is dismissal. Being wrong would hurt, but being treated as irrelevant appears to hurt more. This helps explain why caution can sound like condescension to her, even when the warning is sincere. A person who has spent too long being underestimated may start interpreting every boundary as another attempt to keep her small. The film makes that response understandable while allowing it to become a blind spot. Evelyn can identify the meaning of an object without fully accepting that knowledge does not automatically grant the right to use it. The library accident establishes this contradiction through Rachel Weisz's physical timing. Evelyn begins in concentrated control, stretching toward one precise task. When that action creates instability, Weisz lets confidence turn into alarm one fraction at a time. Her body tries to correct each new consequence until correction becomes impossible. The sequence is funny because her determination survives after the situation has clearly escaped her. It is also a miniature version of her larger journey. she does not create chaos through carelessness alone. She creates it by continuing to intervene after control has become an illusion. A different kind of pressure appears when she must negotiate for Rick's release. Here, Evelyn cannot rely only on academic expertise. She has to improvise around authority, urgency, and a man whose life may end before she secures the information she needs. Weisz changes the rhythm of the character. The hesitant social manner remains, but the purpose beneath it becomes firmer. Evelyn is frightened and still acts. That distinction is essential. Courage in this film is rarely the absence of alarm. It is the ability to keep choosing while alarm is visible. Her central contradiction is therefore not intelligence opposed to foolishness. It is intellectual confidence combined with incomplete moral caution. She understands ancient language more accurately than the people around her, yet she initially treats comprehension as protection. If she can read a warning, some part of her assumes she can manage what the warning describes. Pressure exposes the distance between decoding information and carrying responsibility for it. Her real development depends less on becoming braver than on learning that bravery must answer for its effects. Rick is the relationship that exposes this blind spot most clearly because he is neither impressed by credentials nor threatened by them. He evaluates knowledge according to whether it helps the group survive the next few minutes. Evelyn finds that standard narrow. Rick finds hers dangerously abstract. Their disagreements work because both judgments contain truth. His practicality can become avoidance, and her imagination can become overreach. Each person sees the cost of the other's method before recognizing the limitations of their own. Brendan Fraser communicates Rick's thought through physical orientation. He often appears to be scanning a room, route, or crowd, while other characters remain focused on the conversation directly in front of them. His attention is distributed toward possible danger. That posture makes survival feel like a habit rather than a quality the screenplay simply awards him when action begins. When Evelyn speaks with genuine expertise, Fraser frequently lets Rick's reaction shift before his words do. Skepticism gives way to attention, then respect, without requiring him to announce the change. His voice and movement also separate confidence from invulnerability. Rick can sound relaxed when he wants other people to remain calm, yet his body often prepares for trouble before his expression acknowledges it. The performance lets humor coexist with alertness. He is funny because he recognizes the absurdity of the situation, not because he believes the danger is meaningless. That difference protects the character from becoming a detached action hero who floats above the consequences. Rick's visible goal is initially survival, but his deeper need is connection to something he cannot abandon when escape remains possible. He has adapted to a world of temporary alliances, unstable locations, and immediate problems. That adaptability keeps him alive, yet it can also prevent commitment. Evelyn places pressure on this pattern because she repeatedly gives him reasons to stay after his practical obligation should have ended. His growth is measured by the distance between what he could escape and what he chooses not to leave behind. Their attraction is most persuasive when it appears through recalibration. Evelyn's awkwardness does not vanish when Rick begins to admire her. Rick's roughness does not become refinement when she starts trusting him. They revise their judgments while retaining the traits that caused the original friction. Weisz allows Evelyn to become more direct around him without losing her quick embarrassment. Fraser lets Rick's protectiveness increase without turning every exchange solemn. The relationship reveals character because affection changes their timing before it changes their language. Imhotep applies a different pressure. He is not interested in whether Evelyn feels competent, brave, or respected. To him, people in the present become obstacles or instruments in a plan defined long before they were born. Arnold Vosloo emphasizes this imbalance through stillness. Where Rick's awareness produces constant adjustment, Imhotep often behaves as though the surrounding world should adjust to him. Controlled movement and sustained attention give him authority even when his power is incomplete. That stillness communicates a form of certainty Evelyn does not possess. She approaches the past with questions. Imhotep returns with an answer he refuses to reconsider. His desire has survived for centuries without being tested by another perspective, so memory has hardened into entitlement. He becomes the opposing force not merely because he is supernatural, but because he represents knowledge sealed against correction. Pressure from him forces Evelyn to confront what curiosity becomes when desire no longer accepts limits. The comparison does not make them morally equivalent. Evelyn can recognize consequence and revise her behavior. Imhotep treats consequence as a price other people must pay. Still, the parallel sharpens her arc. Both characters possess specialized knowledge. Both reopen protected history. Both believe a lost possibility justifies action. Their separation emerges through responsibility. One must learn to value living people more than the thrill of discovery, while the other values his private restoration above every life that stands between him and completion. Jonathan appears lighter, but he creates genuine pressure by testing how far family loyalty can coexist with opportunism. Hannah gives him a rhythm of delayed commitment. Jonathan often assesses whether danger can be avoided before deciding how much courage the moment requires. His glances and retreats turn self-interest into comedy, yet he is not entirely hollow. The possibility that he may choose profit or safety keeps Evelyn from assuming that family support is automatic. When he remains involved, the choice carries more meaning because hesitation was real. Benny offers the harsher version of this adaptability. Kevin J. O'Connor plays him with constant social calculation. His posture changes according to the power of the person in front of him, and his voice often seems to search for the safest identity available. He is not pressure-resistant, he is pressure-shaped. Instead of holding to a principle, he becomes whatever the immediate threat rewards. This makes him useful to the plot, but it also gives Rick a distorted reflection. Both men improvise to survive. Only one gradually allows loyalty to restrict his options. Ardith Bey represents the clearest external demand for restraint. His warnings carry the authority of inherited duty, placing him in opposition to the explorers before they understand that he is trying to contain rather than possess the city's power. Oded Fayer's controlled delivery and guarded posture give the character seriousness within a film that often releases tension quickly. Yet the screenplay does not develop his inner conflict as fully as it develops the outsider's fascination. He creates meaningful ethical pressure, although he is also required to deliver information and move the heroes toward the next objective. Several members of the rival expedition function more narrowly. They provide competition, raise the cost of delay, and demonstrate how greed or disbelief can leave a person exposed. As individual characters, however, they receive limited interiority. This weakens some later consequences because the film asks the audience to register danger more strongly than personal loss. The supporting cast is most effective when a character's response creates a moral comparison. It is less effective when a person exists primarily to prove that the threat has become stronger. The pressure map finally returns to Evelyn because the other characters show her possible relationships with uncertainty. Rick respects danger and acts anyway. Jonathan searches for advantage. Benny submits to power. Ardith protects a boundary through duty. Imhotep eliminates uncertainty by forcing the world to obey his memory. Evelyn begins among these positions without fully understanding her own. Her curiosity can produce responsibility, exploitation, retreat, or control, depending on what she chooses after the consequences become visible. This is the deeper argument emerging through character. Knowledge does not reveal a person's value by itself. Pressure reveals what that person believes knowledge permits them to do. Evelyn's intelligence becomes heroic only when it stops serving proof of her own importance and begins serving people endangered by her decisions. Rick's competence becomes heroic when survival expands beyond himself. Imhotep's devotion becomes monstrous when memory excuses possession. The film's characters are divided less by courage than by the limits they accept when desire gains power. On the surface, The Mummy is about explorers who awaken an ancient threat and then struggle to contain what they released. Beneath that adventure is a persistent pattern of containers. A city is buried, a body is sealed away. Information is hidden inside maps, boxes, inscriptions, and books. Museums place the past behind systems of classification. Guardians protect boundaries that outsiders cannot understand. Again and again, the movie asks someone to decide whether a closed thing is a warning, a prison, or an invitation. The ancient punishment of Imhotep establishes that the past was not peacefully concluded, it was deliberately forced underground. His body, desire, and memory are confined through a ritual intended to prevent return, yet the severity of that containment preserves the possibility of future catastrophe. The punishment does not resolve the original transgression. It compresses its energy and leaves later generations responsible for maintaining a boundary they did not create. History becomes dangerous partly because someone tried to make it permanently silent. The 20th century world approaches containment differently, but not always more wisely. The museum organizes artifacts into categories and presents knowledge as something that can be stored, labeled, and supervised. Evelyn works inside this system, yet she is frustrated by its limits. She does not want only to protect what has already been found. She wants access to what remains unavailable. Where the institution sees stewardship, she often sees hesitation. A locked object suggests that something meaningful has been withheld. This makes the puzzle box especially important. It is an access device, but it carries no moral intelligence of its own. It can reveal a map, open a book, or release information regardless of whether the person using it understands the result. The object separates ability from permission. Knowing how to open something proves technical competence, but it does not answer whether opening it is justified. Evelyn initially treats those questions as though they were the same. The books deepen the pattern. They preserve language beyond the lives of the people who wrote it, allowing an intention from one era to act inside another. In this film, reading is not passive. Words can alter physical reality, redirect power, and disturb the division between memory and presence. That gives Evelyn's scholarship unusual cinematic force. Her expertise is not decorative background for Rick's action. Interpretation becomes action, and a mistake in reading carries consequences as immediate as a mistake in combat. At the same time, the movie refuses to make ignorance the safe moral alternative. The threat cannot be understood, much less challenged, without returning to the same ancient systems that released it. Knowledge produces danger, but more knowledge may also be required to address that danger. The problem is not simply that Evelyn reads. It is that access arrives before comprehension is complete. The film distinguishes the hunger to know from the patience needed to understand what knowledge demands. Spatially, this argument moves between openness and confinement. The desert appears limitless, yet it hides a city whose chambers compress the characters into narrow routes. The museum seems orderly and accessible, but its institutional rules restrict Evelyn's ambitions. Rick begins physically confined despite possessing the experience everyone eventually needs. Imhotep begins sealed beneath layers of protection, then expands his influence as those layers fail. Each major movement crosses a boundary that once defined who could act. The Guardians understand boundaries as responsibilities inherited across time. Their position contrasts with the explorers, who tend to see boundaries as obstacles placed between them and a desired object. Neither group initially communicates in a way the other can accept. Secrecy protects the city, but secrecy also prevents outsiders from understanding the full cost of entering it. Curiosity becomes more reckless when warning arrives without sufficient explanation, while explanation becomes difficult when the curious have already decided that every warning conceals treasure. Control therefore operates through several competing systems. The museum controls artifacts through ownership and classification. The Guardians control access through secrecy and force. The rival expeditions attempt control through possession. Evelyn seeks control through translation. Rick relies on control of immediate space, reading exits and threats. Imhotep pursues the most extreme form, attempting to make the present submit to a desire preserved from the past. Each system promises order, yet each creates a different kind of blindness. Desire moves through those systems and gives them emotional weight. The Americans want material reward. Jonathan wants opportunity without the full burden of risk. Evelyn wants discovery and recognition. Rick wants survival before attachment complicates that aim. Imhotep wants restoration so completely that he denies the independence of everyone required to achieve it. The buried city does not create these desires. It concentrates them, making each person reveal what they believe the past owes them. Responsibility enters when the cost of opening a boundary falls on people who did not choose to open it. Evelyn performs the decisive act, but the consequences spread beyond her. This unequal distribution gives the adventure a moral tension its playful surface sometimes hides. Discovery is often celebrated by the person whose name becomes associated with it, while damage may be absorbed by guides, workers, local communities, rivals, or bystanders. The movie notices parts of this imbalance even as its momentum prevents sustained examination. That contradiction extends to the audience. The filmmaking makes access pleasurable. Hidden chambers, mechanical openings, translated symbols, and recovered objects are presented as rewards. We want the sealed space to reveal itself because a closed tomb offers no adventure. When the warning proves justified, the viewer can recognize the character's error without honestly wishing they had remained in the museum. The Mummy makes us desire the transgression and then asks us to fear its result. This is one reason Evelyn remains sympathetic. Her curiosity expresses wonder rather than simple greed, and Rachel Weisz makes that wonder emotionally available. Evelyn does not approach the past as lifeless property. She believes it can speak, and she wants to hear it. Once her actions endanger others, she does not pretend the consequences belong to someone else. The film encourages forgiveness because she accepts responsibility and uses the same intelligence that caused the problem to search for an answer. Yet the forgiveness is not uncomplicated. The story gives Evelyn generous space to learn from a mistake that other characters may not survive. Her good intentions receive more narrative protection than the people affected by them. That imbalance is partly a feature of heroic adventure, where the protagonist's error creates the experience the audience came to enjoy. It is also connected to the film's romanticized colonial setting, where foreign explorers move through Egyptian history with an access the story treats as exciting before it treats it as questionable. One reading might argue that the movie criticizes extraction by showing treasure seekers punished for assuming that age and distance make an object available. Another reading would note that the film still turns Egypt into a spectacular field of discovery for outsiders, while local knowledge often serves as warning, atmosphere, or assistance. Both responses can be true. The movie challenges reckless possession without fully questioning the fantasy that the buried world exists to be entered in the first place. Imhotep complicates the argument further because he has also been denied closure. His containment is a punishment, but it preserves him inside the moment of his desire. He returns without the experience of time that might have altered grief into acceptance. Memory has remained absolute because it was never allowed to become ordinary. The film frames his return as a threat, correctly judging the harm he causes, yet it also gives his longing enough emotional clarity to show how devotion can become domination when it refuses change. This pattern connects to a recognizable human temptation. People return to old records, lost relationships, family histories, and unresolved decisions because an unanswered past can feel active in the present. The desire for explanation is not the same as Evelyn's supernatural excavation, but the emotional structure is familiar. We imagine that one missing piece will make the past stable. Sometimes discovery creates understanding. Sometimes it reveals that what was sealed away had been supporting the life built above it. The Mummy does not offer closure as a simple virtue or curiosity as a simple danger. A world in which every door remains shut would be safer, but it would also deny Evelyn the purpose that makes her compelling. A world in which every barrier is treated as illegitimate would belong to Imhotep's logic of desire without limits. The productive ambiguity lies between them. The film asks whether curiosity can remain alive after it accepts that access creates obligations. That question is carried not only by plot, but by the construction of individual moments. The collapsing library turns order into comedy. The first opening of ancient space turns discovery into temptation. The act of reading transforms intellectual excitement into irreversible consequence. Looking closely at how those scenes use bodies, frames, sound, and withheld information will show exactly how the movie teaches us to enjoy the opening before asking us to confront what comes through it. 3 early sequences make the film's argument about curiosity visible before the characters can explain it. The ancient prologue establishes what was sealed away. The first sight of Hamunaptra makes that sealed world desirable, and the reading from the recovered book turns desire into consequence. Each sequence changes the viewer's position. We begin as witnesses who know more than the explorers, become participants in their excitement, and finally realize that our wish to see the hidden world opened has aligned us with Evelyn's most dangerous impulse. The prologue begins with scale. Monumental architecture, ordered crowds, ceremonial bodies, and a warm metallic palette present ancient Egypt as a world of visible authority. Human figures are arranged inside spaces that appear designed to control movement and social position. The production design does not create historical intimacy, it creates hierarchy. Corridors, chambers, and elevated structures make private desire feel like a disruption inside an enormous public system. Within that visual order, forbidden intimacy is communicated through proximity and marked surfaces rather than extended explanation. The staging makes touch consequential. A small change to an otherwise controlled appearance becomes evidence that a protected boundary has been crossed. The camera's attention to this detail teaches the audience to read bodies as records. Desire cannot remain private because the environment has already created a system for detecting it. The sequence then shifts from composed ceremony to fractured movement. Editing becomes more urgent as secrecy collapses, and the controlled gold of the palace gives way to darker spaces associated with ritual, death, and attempted restoration. Sound contributes to the change. Jerry Goldsmith's music expands the emotional scale, while chanting, movement, and abrupt sonic accents make the punishment feel larger than an individual act. The past is not simply ending, it is being sealed through force. The burial itself is presented with enough restraint to remain within adventure horror, but the filmmaking makes it deeply unpleasant. The frame reduces Imhotep's control until he becomes an object handled by the system that condemns him. Tight spaces replace ceremonial openness. His body is enclosed, his voice loses authority, and the ritual transforms a person into a contained threat. The scene establishes that the boundary protecting the future was created through cruelty. Containment may be necessary, yet it is not morally clean. This opening also gives the audience information the modern characters lack. We understand that Hamunaptra contains more than treasure before Evelyn sees its map. That dramatic advantage could make us reject her expedition immediately. Instead, the film gradually weakens our resistance by changing its visual language. The prologue makes the buried world frightening. The journey back to it makes the same world beautiful. The first full reveal of Hamunaptra is built around delayed visibility. Before the city appears, the desert dominates the frame. Riders and animals move across wide horizontal compositions, their urgency looking small against the surrounding land. The competing expeditions create rapid forward motion, but the destination remains absent. The characters are racing toward a space the image still refuses to provide. As the light changes, the ruins become visible through distance and haze. The editing allows the competitive rhythm to pause long enough for the location to register as an event. Negative space that had seemed empty gains architecture. The city does not need to move physically, the altered light makes it feel as though history has chosen to emerge. This is discovery represented not as information but as revelation. The score is crucial to the viewer's surrender. It does not warn us away from the city. It grants the arrival scale, wonder, and achievement. The music validates Evelyn's belief that the journey was worth making before anyone has examined what the place contains. Wide framing provides no immediate sense of confinement or decay. Hamunaptra first appears as a magnificent answer to effort. The danger remains conceptually present, but beauty temporarily defeats caution. Performance reactions complete that shift. Evelyn's attention is directed toward the city with an intensity that differs from the others' competitive excitement. For the treasure seekers, arrival promises reward. For Rick, it confirms a place he associates with survival. For Evelyn, it validates an intellectual conviction that other people doubted. The camera does not need a long explanation because the contrast is visible in how each person looks. The same ruins satisfy different desires. This scene makes the audience complicit in Evelyn's curiosity. We knew the warning, yet the reveal gives us the pleasure of access. If the expedition turned back at that moment, safety would increase and the movie's promise would disappear. The staging, therefore, places moral caution against cinematic desire. We may understand that the city should remain undisturbed, but the image has been designed to make disturbance feel like fulfillment. The reading scene transforms that fulfillment into a more intimate form. Instead of a vast desert composition, the action gathers around a book. Bodies are positioned within a confined circle of attention, and the object occupies the center of their curiosity. The scale has narrowed from city to text, yet the potential consequence has grown. A landscape could be approached without immediately understanding it. Spoken language activates something the characters cannot see. The scene's rhythm depends on hesitation. The book must be unlocked, examined, and interpreted, giving Rick and the others opportunities to register doubt. Evelyn's expertise creates authority inside the group. She is the person who can make the marks meaningful, so the framing naturally directs attention toward her face, hands, and reactions. Knowledge organizes the blocking. Everyone else becomes an observer waiting for her translation to turn the object into an answer. Sound changes the meaning of that authority. At first, the spoken words are contained within the immediate space. Once the reading takes effect, the sonic field expands beyond the characters. Environmental disturbance, music, and responses from elsewhere suggest that language has traveled farther than Evelyn intended. The film does not need to show every consequence at once. It allows sound to announce that the world outside the frame has answered. The editing then gives the audience a position Evelyn does not possess. Cuts connect her act to movement in the buried chambers, allowing us to understand cause before she fully understands effect. This creates a brief but important separation from her perspective. Moments earlier, we shared her desire to open the book. Now we are watching the result approach people who cannot yet see it. Curiosity remains emotionally understandable, but it no longer feels innocent. Rachel Weisz plays the transition without turning Evelyn instantly into a different character. Satisfaction gives way to uncertainty as the environment refuses to behave like a text under scholarly control. Brendan Fraser's reactions supply the counterweight. Rick may not understand the language, but he recognizes danger through changes in space and sound. Their two forms of knowledge are suddenly placed beside each other. Evelyn can explain what was read. Rick can recognize that explanation has become insufficient. The scene withholds a complete view of the awakened threat, and that restraint preserves both horror and momentum. A fully exposed creature would turn the moment into a confrontation. Partial information lets it remain a consequence still traveling toward the characters. The viewer knows that a boundary has failed, but not yet how the failure will take shape. Anticipation becomes more important than immediate spectacle. Together, these sequences create a precise movement from warning to desire to responsibility. The prologue tells us why the past was sealed. The city reveal makes us want the seal broken. The reading forces us to confront what our desire has supported. Evelyn's curiosity remains worth following because the filmmaking gives discovery genuine beauty and intelligence. It becomes dangerous because access changes the world before understanding has caught up. The next task is to see how design, camera movement, editing, music, performance, and effects continue working together to sustain that contradiction across the entire film. The film's signature effect does not come from one department working in isolation. It comes from several systems agreeing on what the audience should feel, then changing that agreement at exactly the right moment. A supernatural entrance may begin through sound, gain weight through production design, become visible through effects, and finally release pressure through a character's reaction. Horror establishes the stakes. Performance and editing decide how long those stakes remain frightening before adventure takes control again. The visual design begins with a contrast between scale and enclosure. Deserts, river routes, and ruined exteriors are presented in wide compositions that promise movement and discovery. Tomb interiors compress the frame around stone, shadow, narrow passages, and objects whose functions are only partly understood. The shift affects more than atmosphere. Open space gives the characters confidence because danger appears visible and escapable. Enclosed space removes that confidence by allowing history to remain hidden just outside the light. Color and texture reinforce the movement. Sunlit exteriors carry heat, dust, worn fabric, and weathered surfaces. Ancient chambers introduce deeper blacks, aged gold, muted stone, and cooler pockets of darkness. The film does not pursue archaeological neutrality. Every surface is made to communicate quickly. A chamber should feel forbidden before anyone translates its inscription. A book should appear powerful before its words take effect. Design turns information into instinct. This visual clarity is especially valuable because the screenplay moves rapidly between locations, groups, and objectives. The audience needs to understand which object matters, who possesses it, and what kind of space surrounds it without stopping the story for repeated explanation. Maps, boxes, books, statues, passageways, and burial chambers are given distinct shapes and positions. The design provides a memory system. When an object returns, the viewer recognizes its narrative importance before a character names it. Costume contributes to the same readability. Rick's practical clothing supports physical movement and makes him legible against both desert and stone. Evelyn's appearance carries traces of institutional order even as the expedition places her in increasingly uncontrolled environments. Jonathan's presentation suits someone who wants the rewards of adventure without looking fully prepared for its demands. Imhotep's changing appearance makes his recovery of power visible. Character arcs can therefore be read through silhouette, condition, and contrast before they are explained through speech. The camera generally preserves geography during action. It gives the viewer enough spatial information to understand where characters are moving, what separates them from safety, and which direction a threat is entering. Closer images then supply urgency through faces, hands, and immediate obstacles. This alternation keeps spectacle from becoming an anonymous storm of movement. We are not only watching danger happen, we know who has noticed it, who remains unaware, and which decision has narrowed the route of escape. Editing controls the film's tonal elasticity. A threatening image may be held long enough to establish consequence, then followed by a reaction that exposes the absurdity of the character's situation. The comedy often comes from timing rather than from treating the threat as false. A cut arrives after confidence has been punctured or stays on a face while a character realizes that the plan has failed. Because the danger remains real, humor becomes a way of surviving pressure rather than evidence that nothing matters. Reaction shots are particularly important to Evelyn and Rick. Evelyn's attention often tells us when an artifact has shifted from ordinary object to meaningful discovery. Rick's response tells us when discovery has become an immediate physical problem. The edit can move between those forms of perception without requiring lengthy explanation. Scholarship creates one kind of suspense, situational awareness creates another. Their partnership is built into the visual rhythm. Physical action follows the same character logic. Rick's movement is direct and adaptive. He responds to collapsing plans by using whatever immediate route remains, giving his competence an improvised quality. Evelyn is less physically assured at first, but she is rarely removed from the action's causal structure. Her decisions, translations, and discoveries keep affecting what everyone else must do. The film may position Rick as the most experienced fighter, yet it avoids making Evelyn a passive reward waiting beyond the danger. Jerry Goldsmith's score supplies emotional continuity across the changing tones. The music treats the adventure with conviction even when the characters respond comically. Expansive themes make landscapes feel like destinations rather than empty distance. Rhythmic urgency pushes pursuit forward. Darker passages give ancient power a seriousness that dialogue alone could not maintain. The score effectively tells us that the characters may joke about their circumstances, but the film still believes in the grandeur of the journey. That sincerity prevents the movie from collapsing into parody. Without it, broad reactions and rapid tonal shifts could make every supernatural element feel disposable. The music holds on to scale while performance provides personality. Romance also benefits from this support. A quieter exchange does not need to halt the adventure because the score can carry traces of its larger emotional world beneath the intimacy. The tones remain connected rather than taking turns in separate compartments. Sound design frequently introduces the threat before effects display it fully. Movement in darkness, changes in the environment, distant disturbance, and sudden absence of ordinary sound create expectation beyond the visible frame. This is useful for a creature whose power grows over time. The audience can feel Imhotep's influence expanding even when his physical presence remains incomplete. Sound lets supernatural space exceed photographic space. The visual effects make that expansion readable. Imhotep's recovery is not simply a change from weakness to strength. His body becomes an indicator of what he has taken and how close he is to fulfilling his aim. Sand, weather, swarming movement, and altered human form allow the environment itself to appear recruited into his return. The concept connects effects to the central argument. The past is no longer sitting inside an object. It is assembling itself through the present. Some digital images show the limitations of their period more clearly now. Surfaces can appear lighter or less physically integrated than the sets around them, and large supernatural gestures occasionally feel more illustrative than threatening. Yet the effectiveness of these moments rarely depends on realism alone. Framing establishes scale, sound gives force, editing protects momentum, and performance supplies belief. The departments surrounding the effect help the audience respond to its dramatic function even when its texture is visibly synthetic. Tactile environments give those effects an essential anchor. Actors touch stone, move through dust, handle weighted objects, and occupy spaces with visible depth. The supernatural therefore interrupts a world that already feels materially present. This contrast is more persuasive than digital smoothness would be by itself. The strange image gains credibility because the ordinary surfaces around it have been given texture and resistance. Screenplay structure keeps most spectacle attached to cause. A character opens something, misreads something, takes something, or reaches a place despite a warning. The resulting set piece is not merely scheduled excitement, it is the physical consequence of a choice. Direction, design, sound, and effects then enlarge that consequence until private curiosity becomes public danger. This is where craft most clearly supports the film's argument rather than decorating it. There are moments when decoration takes over. A spectacular transformation may receive more attention than the emotional loss surrounding it. Egyptian imagery can be arranged for instant mystery without equal interest in cultural specificity. The speed and confidence of the craft sometimes encourage the viewer to accept a simplified world because that world is so easy to read. Beauty and momentum can conceal the questions the story does not wish to slow down and answer. Even with those limitations, the major craft systems usually converge around the same tension. Design makes the sealed past desirable. Camera movement carries us toward it. Editing turns access into momentum. Music grants discovery emotional legitimacy. Sound and effects return the cost of what was opened. The craft does more than decorate the argument about curiosity and control, it makes the audience experience that argument. The harder test is whether this control remains persuasive when the film's shortcuts, contradictions, and dated assumptions can no longer be carried entirely by momentum. The movie's most consequential weakness is not the visible age of certain effects. It is the unequal distribution of curiosity and consequence. Foreign explorers receive the excitement of entering Egypt's buried history, while Egyptian characters are more often asked to warn, guard, guide, resist, or absorb the disruption. This imbalance matters because the film's central question concerns who has the right to open the past. The adventure examines personal responsibility more confidently than cultural entitlement. Egypt is presented as a vivid cinematic idea rather than a complex social world. The ruins are magnificent, the museum is full of possibility, and the desert creates distance from ordinary modern life. These choices provide immediate atmosphere, but they also turn the setting into a field of mystery designed largely for outsiders. Local life rarely receives the interior attention given to Evelyn's ambition, Rick's survival instinct, or Jonathan's appetite for treasure. The difference becomes especially visible in how warnings are framed. The Magi understand what Hamunaptra contains and accept a long responsibility to keep it sealed. Their judgment is correct, yet the film initially positions them as an obstacle to the expedition's pleasure. Because the audience is aligned with Evelyn and Rick, restraint appears threatening before it appears wise. The structure encourages us to distrust the people protecting the site until the outsiders have already confirmed the danger for themselves. Ardith Bey partly resists this limitation. He is capable, composed, knowledgeable, and repeatedly more accurate than the visitors who dismiss the warning. Oded Feyer gives him enough authority to prevent the character from feeling merely decorative. Even so, Ardith's interior life remains limited. We understand his duty more clearly than his personal relationship with it. He often enters the narrative to contain danger, provide necessary information, or assist the central group rather than to pursue a fully developed desire of his own. This affects the deeper argument about knowledge. Evelyn's curiosity is allowed to become heroic because the story follows her mistake, fear, responsibility, and attempted correction from the inside. The Guardian's restraint receives less emotional examination, even though their position is vindicated. As a result, the film asks whether an individual scholar can learn to use knowledge responsibly, but it does not press equally hard on the larger assumption that foreign expeditions should control access to Egyptian history at all. The strongest defense is that The Mummy openly operates as heightened pulp adventure, not as historical drama. Its characters, villains, treasures, and locations are drawn in broad lines because speed and readability are central to the experience. The setting follows traditions inherited from earlier monster films, adventure serials, and romantic expedition stories. Within that form, complexity is often compressed so that a map, costume, silhouette, or warning can establish narrative function immediately. The film also does not present every outsider as enlightened. Greed, arrogance, and disbelief repeatedly place treasure seekers in danger. Evelyn's knowledge is valuable, but her confidence causes the central crisis. Rick's competence cannot replace the information preserved by the Guardians. Ardith is not proved superstitious or cowardly. The story ultimately confirms that the people protecting the site understood its danger better than those who entered it for discovery or profit. Those choices keep the cultural framing from becoming a simple celebration of extraction. The movie knows that the expedition has violated a boundary. Its weakness is that the violation becomes meaningful primarily through its effect on the visiting protagonists. The local perspective establishes the moral rule, while the outsiders receive the fuller emotional journey of breaking, understanding, and responding to that rule. This limitation is not destructive to the film's immediate entertainment. The chemistry, momentum, and visual storytelling remain effective. It is more consequential to the meaning than to the pacing. A richer Egyptian perspective would not require turning the adventure into a lecture or removing its romantic exaggeration. Even one local scholar or guardian with an independent personal objective could have complicated the assumption that Evelyn's access is naturally central. The absence narrows what the story can finally say about stewardship. A smaller limitation comes from the movie's rapid emotional resets. Secondary characters are sometimes placed in danger mainly to demonstrate Imhotep's increasing power. Once a threatening sequence has established the next level of the problem, comedy or forward motion often arrives before the human consequence has fully settled. The audience understands that the stakes have risen, but may not feel the loss with equal force. This pattern protects the buoyant tone. The movie wants supernatural danger without allowing grief or dread to dominate the adventure for long. Rick, Evelyn, and Jonathan must remain capable of banter, attraction, and improvisation. If every consequence produced sustained emotional collapse, the film would become a darker experience with a slower rhythm. The quick reset is therefore not simply careless. It is part of the machinery that allows horror, romance, and comedy to remain in circulation. The defense is persuasive up to a point. Genre tone determines what kind of emotional attention a film can support, and The Mummy never promises severe psychological realism. Its appeal depends on the feeling that terror can be survived without permanently draining wonder from the journey. The lightness also keeps Imhotep from controlling the entire emotional register. His threat is powerful, but the heroes retain the ability to define their own responses. The problem appears when a supporting figure feels more like evidence than a person. If the film has not built a relationship before the danger arrives, the consequence can register as a functional step in Imhotep's restoration rather than a meaningful loss. This weakens suspense because the viewer begins distinguishing protected central characters from expendable narrative pieces. The threat looks severe while feeling increasingly organized around familiar genre permissions. The tonal reset is mostly intentional and largely inseparable from what makes the film distinctive. It becomes damaging only in specific moments where one extra beat of reaction could have given danger weight without changing the overall rhythm. The cultural simplification is harder to excuse as necessary. It belongs to the adventure tradition the movie embraces, but tradition explains a choice without removing its limitation. The friction test therefore reveals a film whose strengths and weaknesses often share the same source. Speed creates exhilaration and reduces reflection. Broad characterization creates clarity and limits perspective. Romanticized design produces wonder and turns a real culture into cinematic shorthand. Understanding why these choices felt natural to a 1999 blockbuster requires widening the frame beyond this individual story and looking at the genre traditions it revived, revised, and carried forward. The Mummy sits in a wider tradition. But its most important decision is an act of transformation rather than preservation. Universal's 1932 film treated the mummy as a figure of horror shaped by forbidden desire, death, and an unnatural return. The 1999 version retains the name Imhotep and the idea of love corrupted by refusal to accept loss, yet it changes the cinematic machinery surrounding him. Stillness becomes speed. Intimate unease becomes large-scale pursuit. The monster is no longer only the subject of the story, he becomes the engine of an adventure. That change affects what the title promises. A viewer arriving for severe horror may find the film unexpectedly playful, while someone expecting a light expedition still encounters images borrowed from bodily decay, ancient punishment, and supernatural violation. Stephen Sommers does not resolve this contradiction by choosing one genre over the other. He uses horror to give adventure consequences and adventure to make horror accessible. The threat must feel serious enough to justify escape, but not so psychologically devastating that wonder cannot return. The movie also inherits the grammar of archaeological adventure popularized long before 1999 and reshaped by modern blockbuster cinema. Maps become invitations. Ruins become puzzles. Rival groups convert discovery into a race. History is organized around objects that can be found, taken, translated, and activated. This tradition often turns archaeology into movement rather than patient study. The Mummy participates enthusiastically, yet Evelyn gives scholarship more narrative force than such stories sometimes allow. Her knowledge does not merely explain the action after it happens, it repeatedly causes the action to change direction. Rick belongs to the swashbuckling side of that tradition. His competence is physical, improvised, and socially irreverent. Evelyn belongs to the intellectual side, driven by evidence and language. The film's distinctive energy comes from refusing to let either tradition dominate. An adventure led only by Rick might become a sequence of escapes. One led only by Evelyn might lose the kinetic contrast the movie wants. Their relationship turns genre fusion into character structure. The film also arrived during a transitional period in blockbuster effects. Large physical environments, costumes, props, stunt work, and location imagery share the screen with ambitious digital creatures and transformations. A modern viewer can often identify which images belong more visibly to their technological moment. That visibility changes the experience, but it does not make the effects historically meaningless. Their ambition reflects a period when digital imagery was expanding what an adventure film could ask a supernatural body or landscape to do. Imhotep's incomplete form is especially connected to that moment. The film uses digital transformation not merely to display a creature, but to show power returning in stages. His appearance becomes a narrative measurement. Contemporary effects might render every surface with greater detail, but technical polish would not automatically improve the underlying idea. The design remains effective when the audience reads progress, danger, and stolen vitality through the changing body. Over time, the slight artificiality of some images can even strengthen the film's storybook quality. The Mummy does not present itself as ordinary reality interrupted by one impossible event. Its entire world is heightened. Characters survive extraordinary situations, ancient language acts directly on the present, and landscapes respond to supernatural will. The effects belong to that exaggerated register, even when they no longer produce seamless illusion. What keeps the movie from feeling like a disposable effects demonstration is its emotional sincerity. The score believes in the scale of the journey. The actors commit to danger without suppressing humor. The romance is not treated as an embarrassing interruption, and the horror imagery is not dismissed simply because a joke follows it. This tonal openness separates the film from genre hybrids that protect themselves through constant irony. The Mummy is playful, but it does not appear ashamed of wanting to be thrilling, romantic, frightening, and funny within the same passage. Its commercial continuation into The Mummy Returns and the related Scorpion King film confirmed that the 1999 movie had produced more than a single monster story. It had created an adventure framework capable of supporting recurring heroes, expanding mythology, and larger spectacle. Yet the original remains comparatively focused. Its world building serves the immediate conflict between curiosity, survival, and restoration. The film does not require the viewer to treat every detail as preparation for another installment. A later cultural reading also makes its colonial adventure assumptions more visible. The fantasy of foreign explorers entering Egyptian spaces, competing over artifacts, and receiving the central emotional journey belongs to a tradition that can no longer pass as neutral background. This awareness changes the balance of sympathy. Ardith Bay's restraint may appear more reasonable earlier, while Evelyn's excitement may feel less innocent. The film remains enjoyable, but enjoyment can now coexist with clearer recognition of whose perspective the genre historically privileged. That shift does not require denying what Evelyn contributes. Her curiosity is not motivated solely by possession, and her willingness to accept responsibility distinguishes her from the treasure seekers around her. The more precise reading is that personal good intention operates inside a larger fantasy of access the film only partially examines. Her development answers whether one person can learn from opening the wrong door. It does not fully answer who created the assumption that the door was hers to open. Placed within horror history, archaeological adventure, late 90s effects cinema, and the franchise it generated, The Mummy becomes easier to understand as a carefully chosen reinvention. It turns an old monster into a modern source of movement, converts scholarship into action, and uses new visual tools to make the buried past expand across the screen. Those wider traditions explain the shape of the movie, but its specific appeal still returns to Evelyn. The adventure matters because her curiosity makes the forbidden world desirable before the consequences make responsibility unavoidable. The production history supports the idea that the film's genre mixture was designed from the beginning rather than discovered accidentally in the edit. 4 documented choices are especially revealing. They explain the movie's scale, the continuity of Imhotep's performance, the freedom of its comedy, and the confidence with which it moves beyond the tone associated with the earlier Universal film. Years later, Stephen Sommers explained that several earlier versions of the project had attempted a more direct remake of the 1932 Boris Karloff film. He respected that movie, but did not want simply to reproduce its approach. His proposal required a much larger canvas and a substantial visual effects commitment. This changes how we read the finished film's relationship with horror. The swashbuckling movement, romantic banter, and enormous supernatural events are not distractions added to an old monster story. They are the central method of reinvention. That decision also explains why Imhotep is designed as a force capable of changing landscapes and driving action, rather than a figure who depends mainly on stillness and suggestion. Sommers needed the mummy to function inside the grammar of a blockbuster adventure. The monster's emotional motive preserves a connection to tragic horror, while his expanding physical power generates the pursuit structure. The genre blend begins inside the antagonist, not only in the personalities of the heroes. Industrial light and magic visual effects supervisor John Burton Jr. later recalled that Sommers initially asked which ideas should be avoided because they would be impossible or unaffordable. Burton encouraged him to present the largest version of the ideas first and allow practical limitations to be considered afterward. That exchange helps explain the film's maximalism. Sand becomes a face, weather behaves like intention, and the creature's return unfolds through several visual states. The importance of this fact is not that ambition automatically produces better effects. It is that the film's supernatural imagery was conceived around narrative possibility before technical caution narrowed it. Some images now show their age, but the ideas remain tied to story. Imhotep's changing form measures progress. Environmental effects show that his desire is spreading beyond his body. The scale expresses the fear that once the past escapes containment, it will not remain limited to the chamber where it was found. Burton also confirmed that the effects team used Arnold Vosloo's captured movement to preserve his performance when Imhotep was digitally incomplete. The synthetic creature was not treated as a separate replacement performing generic monster behavior. Vosloo's movement remained the foundation. This production choice clarifies why Imhotep feels like one continuous character across radically different appearances. The consistency is especially important to the film's argument about restoration. Imhotep does not become more human by receiving an entirely new personality with each stage. The same controlled purpose is present while his body changes around it. The audience can recognize intention inside an image that is visibly artificial. Performance becomes the bridge between ancient memory and digital spectacle, allowing the effects to extend character rather than pause it. John Hannah later recalled that he initially struggled to understand Jonathan's function beside the heroic Rick and the other comic personalities. Sommers encouraged him to experiment in the background and trusted the camera to capture useful comic behavior. This explains why Jonathan's humor often feels embedded in group staging instead of arriving as a separate performance designed to stop the plot. His glances, hesitations, and attempts to protect his own interests can remain active while another character carries the main conversation. Comedy therefore occupies the edges of suspense. The viewer may notice Jonathan evaluating an escape or an opportunity before the scene formally acknowledges it. This background freedom supports the movie's unusual tonal movement. Humor does not always follow danger. It can exist inside the same frame, generated by the fact that different characters interpret the threat according to different priorities. These production choices reveal a consistent strategy. Sommers rejected a restrained repetition of the earlier film. The effects team was encouraged to begin with story ideas rather than assumed technical ceilings. Vosloo's physical performance was protected through digital transformation. Hannah was given room to discover comedy within ensemble action. Scale, threat, character, and humor were developed as interconnected systems. The evidence strengthens the central reading without proving it to be the only possible one. The movie was deliberately built to make a forbidden past emotionally understandable, visually expansive, and entertaining to approach. Evelyn's curiosity supplies the human invitation, but the production itself shares her instinct. It keeps asking what might become possible if caution is temporarily set aside. The strongest counter-reading must now ask whether that curiosity truly carries the film, or whether another character and another desire have been its real center all along. The strongest alternative reading begins with a simple challenge. Evelyn may be the audience's point of entry, but Imhotep may be the movie's true thematic center. Her curiosity releases the story, while his refusal of loss gives that story its emotional shape. Under this interpretation, The Mummy is not primarily about the ethics of opening the past. It is about what happens when love is preserved so completely that it can no longer accept time, change, or another person's freedom. The film itself gives this argument immediate support. It begins with Imhotep, not Rick or Evelyn. Before the modern expedition appears, the audience is shown the desire that produced his punishment and the unfinished purpose that could motivate his return. This is more information than a simple monster introduction requires. The prologue does not merely explain why a creature is buried. It establishes an emotional claim that every later action will attempt to complete. The title also directs attention toward him. Rick may occupy the heroic position and Evelyn may create the decisive movement, but the film is named for the figure whose recovery organizes its escalating structure. His changing body acts as the most visible measurement of narrative progress. Every new stage tells us that the ancient plan is moving closer to completion, whether or not the heroes understand how to interrupt it. Seen this way, Evelyn is less the central subject than the modern mechanism through which Imhotep's story resumes. Her intelligence grants the past a voice, but the desire speaking through that opening belongs to him. The consequences do not take their shape from what Evelyn wants. They take their shape from what Imhotep has wanted across centuries. Curiosity turns the key. Grief determines what comes through the door. The romantic structure strengthens the alternative. Rick and Evelyn are drawn together through disagreement, adjustment, and growing respect. Their connection changes because each person responds to new information about the other. Imhotep's love has been protected from change. It exists as a completed image carried across time, not as a living relationship in which both people continue to choose. The two romances create a contrast between affection that adapts and desire that demands restoration. That contrast can explain why the movie invests so much emotional clarity in its antagonist. Imhotep is dangerous, yet his motive is not treated as meaningless. The viewer can understand the wish to recover someone lost while rejecting the harm required to pursue it. His tragedy is not that he loves too deeply in some admirable abstract sense. It is that he mistakes the endurance of his desire for proof that the world must satisfy it. This reading makes the film's recurring objects look different. Books, maps, and keys are no longer primarily tests of Evelyn's responsibility. They become instruments through which an ancient intention recruits the present. The modern characters believe they are using objects to retrieve knowledge. From Imhotep's side of the story, those same objects are the infrastructure of return. The past has left behind everything required to make itself active again. The alternative also exposes a weakness in the Evelyn-centered argument. Her curiosity is challenged, but it is not fundamentally rejected. The film continues to value her intelligence, rewards her ability to interpret ancient knowledge, and depends on her willingness to keep reading after the first disastrous result. If the movie were mainly a warning about curiosity, its later structure would be contradictory. The quality that causes the crisis remains necessary to address it. Imhotep's story resolves that contradiction more easily. Knowledge itself is not the problem. The problem is desire that refuses revision. Evelyn can learn from consequence while remaining curious. Rick can move from self-preservation toward attachment. Jonathan can act beyond immediate profit. Imhotep's purpose remains fixed. He has carried one answer for too long to permit another. The difference between hero and threat becomes the ability to change rather than the decision to open or close a book. Yet the Imhotep-centered reading leaves important elements unresolved. It explains the prologue, the supernatural escalation, the title, and the mirrored romances. It does not fully explain why the pleasure of discovery is so carefully aligned with Evelyn's perspective. The city reveal, the handling of artifacts, and the repeated emphasis on translation ask the audience to experience curiosity from within. If Imhotep alone were the thematic center, much of that intellectual excitement would function only as elaborate plot delivery. The alternative can also reduce Evelyn's agency too severely. She may activate an ancient intention, but she is not merely a neutral passage through which someone else's story travels. Her choices determine when access occurs, how the group understands the problem, and whether knowledge remains separated from responsibility. Imhotep supplies the force of the past, while Evelyn determines the modern relationship with it. The conflict requires both positions. My reasoned view is that Evelyn remains the experiential and moral center, while Imhotep is the film's gravitational counterimage. We follow her curiosity because it can change after encountering consequence. We fear his desire because it has survived without changing. Her relationship with the past remains open to correction. His relationship with it has hardened into a demand. This combined reading strengthens the original question. Evelyn's curiosity makes the adventure worth following not because opening the past is automatically virtuous, but because she can revise what opening means. Imhotep shows the opposite possibility, an old desire returning with greater power and no greater wisdom. One character seeks understanding and gradually accepts obligation. The other seeks restoration and treats obligation as something owed by everyone else. The uncertainty that remains is valuable rather than evasive. The film clearly condemns Imhotep's harmful choices, but it allows the motive beneath them to remain recognizable. It clearly celebrates Evelyn's curiosity, but it lets that curiosity create damage. The two characters form a question about what separates devotion from possession and discovery from entitlement. A second viewing reveals how early the film begins building that comparison, often through details that seem decorative until their later significance becomes visible. The Mummy is not built around a final twist that secretly transforms every earlier event. Its rewatch value comes from design rather than deception. A second viewing does not reveal that we misunderstood the entire story. It reveals how carefully the movie was preparing changes in authority, attraction, and responsibility while allowing spectacle to hold our immediate attention. The most persistent signal is the movement of access. Maps, keys, books, doors, and containers keep passing between people. On a first viewing, these objects appear to be efficient devices that send the characters toward the next location. On a second, possession becomes a record of responsibility. The person holding an object may have the ability to open something without possessing the knowledge required to understand it. Every transfer changes who can act and who will bear the result. The puzzle box is the clearest example. It first appears small enough to be treated as a curious object or potential source of information. Its later uses reveal that access is never limited to one destination. The same mechanism can disclose a route, unlock knowledge, and remove protection. Watching again, the object feels less like a convenient key and more like the movie's argument reduced to something that fits in a hand. Capability remains neutral until desire gives it direction. Books follow a similar pattern, but their visual weight differs from the box. Characters lean toward them, arrange themselves around them, and wait for Evelyn to convert their surfaces into meaning. The blocking grants her authority before the plot fully recognizes it. On a rewatch, these moments show her social position changing. She begins as a scholar seeking permission to matter and gradually becomes the person whose understanding determines everyone's next move. Rachel Weisz supports that progression through posture. Evelyn can appear physically uncertain when entering an unfamiliar social situation, then become more stable when language or history gives her firm ground. Her voice gains direction when she interprets an artifact, even if the surrounding danger remains beyond her control. The subtle shift matters because it separates confidence from certainty. She knows what the words indicate before she knows everything the act of reading will cause. Brendan Fraser's reactions form a parallel signal. Rick often watches the environment while Evelyn watches the object. Early in the story, this difference makes them appear incompatible. On a second viewing, the repeated arrangement looks like the foundation of a complete partnership. The film keeps placing one character's attention where the other has a blind spot. Their attraction develops alongside a visual pattern of divided awareness. Rick's humor changes meaning as well. At first, his relaxed responses can appear to show that he takes little seriously. Rewatching reveals how often the humor arrives after he has already identified the danger. It becomes a method of managing fear and keeping others functional. His body may prepare for action while his voice remains casual. The performance quietly distinguishes emotional lightness from physical carelessness. Imhotep provides the opposite performance pattern. Arnold Vosloo's stillness initially communicates supernatural confidence. Later context makes that stillness feel like emotional fixation. His attention does not move freely through a space because he is not discovering the present. He is searching within it for confirmation of something already decided. Other characters revise their understanding as events develop. His gaze keeps forcing new surroundings into an ancient expectation. Touch repeatedly reveals the difference between affection and possession. The prologue establishes a world where contact leaves visible evidence and carries political consequence. Later gestures may appear romantic, threatening, protective, or mistaken, depending on who initiates them and whether the other person is treated as an equal participant. On a second viewing, the film's romances are separated less by intensity than by recognition. One relationship grows through seeing the other person more clearly. The other seeks to make a present body satisfy a preserved memory. Benny's quick changes under pressure also gain meaning. His ability to shift language, posture, and allegiance is initially comic because the adjustments happen with such urgency. Later, the same pattern defines his moral position. He survives by identifying power and making himself useful to it. Nothing inside him needs to remain consistent as long as the external threat is temporarily satisfied. His adaptability resembles Rick's improvisation on the surface, but repeated viewing exposes the difference between flexibility and surrender. Ardith Bey benefits greatly from hindsight. His early appearances are framed through the expedition's uncertainty, so secrecy makes him look potentially hostile. Once his responsibility is understood, the same controlled behavior reads as containment. He is not trying to win access or take possession. He is attempting to prevent people with incomplete information from crossing a boundary. The film hides his moral accuracy in plain sight by aligning the viewer with the people most eager to distrust it. Sound provides warnings before the characters can translate them. A disturbance in the environment, an altered silence, or an expanding musical phrase often announces that an action has reached beyond the visible frame. On first viewing, these cues build suspense. On a second, they mark the exact point at which control has already been lost. The characters may still be discussing an object while the soundtrack tells us that the object has changed the surrounding world. The library collapse also acquires a more precise function. It is not a coded prediction of one later event, it is a behavioral model. Evelyn notices instability, attempts correction, and continues acting until the consequences exceed her reach. The comedy makes the pattern lovable before the supernatural story makes it costly. That early affection influences how readily the audience forgives her later overconfidence. These signals reward a rewatch because they belong to character, staging, and recurring design rather than to hidden trivia. The film does not depend on viewers finding secret references in the background. It asks them to reconsider who controls access, who notices danger, who changes under pressure, and who remains trapped inside a single desire. The decisive turns will complete these patterns, but their foundation has already been visible in every opened object, redirected gaze, and boundary crossed. From this point on, the ending, the reveals, and their meaning are all on the table. If you want the film unspoiled, pause here and come back after you've seen it. The irreversible turning point is Evelyn's reading from the Book of the Dead. Until that moment, Hamunaptra contains several possible stories. It can still be a scholarly discovery, a treasure hunt, a competition between expeditions, or a place whose warnings may prove exaggerated. The reading collapses those possibilities into consequence. Imhotep awakens, and Evelyn's intellectual achievement becomes an event that can no longer be controlled through interpretation alone. His return immediately changes the meaning of restoration. Imhotep rebuilds himself by taking life from members of the expedition associated with opening the sacred chest. The film keeps the process within stylized adventure horror, but the structure is unmistakable. His recovery is not healing, it is extraction. Each improvement in his body represents a loss imposed on someone else. The past becomes physically complete by making the present less complete. This resolves the changing body signal. Imhotep's stages are not only an effects showcase or a countdown toward greater power. They reveal the moral economy of his desire. He believes restoration justifies transfer. Other lives can be converted into the missing pieces of the world he wants back. His emotional motive may be recognizable, but the visible method proves that longing has become entitlement. The cost also spreads far beyond Evelyn. Cairo experiences supernatural disruption. Ordinary people lose control of themselves, and individuals with little understanding of Hamunaptra become part of Imhotep's expanding influence. The adventure therefore confirms the earlier criticism about unequal consequence. Evelyn opens the book, but many people who never touched it pay for that act. Her willingness to respond matters, although responsibility cannot restore everyone affected. Beni survives his first encounter with the awakened Imhotep because his desperate movement through different languages produces one that the ancient priest understands. The moment is comic in timing, but its consequence is serious. Imhotep recognizes usefulness and turns Beni into an intermediary. Language saves him temporarily, yet survival places him inside the service of a power he does not control. This creates the clearest contrast between Beni and Evelyn. Both characters use linguistic adaptability to cross boundaries. Evelyn translates because she wants meaning. Beni changes language because he wants immediate protection. Her knowledge gradually acquires responsibility. His knowledge becomes bargaining material. The film does not divide them according to intelligence. It divides them according to what each person allows intelligence to serve. Beni's allegiance also completes a pattern established during Rick's first experience at Hamunaptra. When danger overwhelmed their military unit, Beni fled and Rick remained exposed. Both men survived, but they learned different lessons. Rick learned to expect plans to collapse and later uses that awareness to protect others. Beni learned that attachment is dangerous and continues treating every relationship as temporary. The climax will return them to the same city and force each survival philosophy to declare its final value. The revelation that Dr. Bay belongs to the Magi makes an earlier museum moment newly legible. His alarm at the map and its apparent destruction no longer look like institutional carelessness. He recognized the route and tried to prevent another entrance into Hamunaptra without revealing the full secret. On a rewatch, the curator's behavior belongs to a concealed protective duty rather than simple irritation with Evelyn's ambition. That reveal also complicates the museum's symbolic role. It is not merely a colonial institution arranging Egyptian history for display. It secretly contains someone committed to preventing the most dangerous part of that history from being disturbed. Dr. Bay stands between classification and guardianship, but secrecy limits his effectiveness. He protects knowledge by withholding it, leaving Evelyn unable to understand why her discovery produces fear rather than support. Ardith Bay undergoes the same moral reversal more openly. The figure who initially appears to threaten the expedition becomes one of the few people consistently acting to contain harm. His early hostility was not competition for treasure or resentment of foreign discovery. It was an attempt to preserve a boundary whose failure he understood. The heroes do not defeat his worldview. Events force them to enter it. The film still grants Rick and Evelyn the central agency, but it now requires them to depend on information held by the people they ignored. This is a partial correction of the adventure's outsider perspective. It acknowledges local guardianship as necessary and accurate. The correction remains incomplete because Ardith and Dr. Bay continue supporting an emotional journey centered on the visitors. Their knowledge saves the protagonist's mission without receiving equal interior development. Imhotep's plan for Evelyn brings the conflict between recognition and possession into direct focus. He needs her as the human sacrifice required to restore Ankh-Sunamun. Earlier, his attention briefly allows memory to overlay Evelyn's identity, as though a woman in the present can be interpreted through the shape of someone he lost. By the ritual, the reduction is complete. Evelyn is not a scholar, partner, or independent person within his design. She is material. This clarifies why Imhotep's love cannot be treated as romantic simply because it has endured. Endurance has not preserved mutuality. His desire recognizes only the past version of the relationship and whatever the present can contribute to rebuilding it. Evelyn's fear, will, and future are irrelevant. Love becomes possession when the beloved image matters more than the living people required to restore it. Evelyn's response completes an important part of her arc. She understands that Imhotep wants her alive for the ritual, which gives her a small amount of leverage during the confrontation in Cairo. Rather than treating her protected status as a private escape, she tries to use it to reduce the danger facing the others. The attempt cannot control Imhotep completely, but it demonstrates that her intelligence is now directed toward people rather than proof of her own competence. Her capture is therefore not merely a conventional device that places the heroine at the end of the hero's route. The film does use the familiar rescue structure, and Rick must pursue her. At the same time, Evelyn remains causally active. She understands the ritual, recognizes the importance of the ancient books, and later supplies the knowledge required to change the final conflict. Physical confinement does not remove her intellectual agency. The discovery that the Golden Book of Amun-Ra can counter Imhotep brings Evelyn's original goal back in altered form. She traveled to Hamunaptra hoping to find this book as a historic achievement. Now finding it is necessary because another book was used without sufficient understanding. The object she once wanted as proof becomes an instrument of repair. ambition, and responsibility finally point toward the same destination. The two books create a clean symbolic opposition, though not a simple division between bad and good knowledge. The Book of the Dead can return life, but resurrection is directed by the desire of the person using it. The Book of Amun-Ra can command ancient power and remove Imhotep's supernatural protection, but it also requires correct interpretation. Neither object acts wisely on its own. Text preserves capability, while living people determine purpose. The puzzle box connects them, confirming its moral neutrality. The same access mechanism opens information that releases Imhotep and information that can stop him. This answers the repeated object pattern with precision. Access is neither heroic nor corrupt by itself. The judgment belongs to what the user understands, why the object is opened, and whether the person accepts the consequences. The return to Hamunaptra reverses the meaning of the first expedition. Initially, the city is approached through competition and excitement. The second journey is driven by obligation. Rick, Jonathan, Evelyn, and Ardith are no longer entering because the hidden world promises something they want. They return because leaving it behind would allow the damage to continue. The destination remains the same, but the moral direction has changed. This is where Evelyn's curiosity becomes worth following rather than merely forgivable. The film does not redeem her by making her abandon knowledge. It requires her to use more of it. She must read again, interpret again, and trust the intellectual ability that caused the original danger. Growth does not mean becoming the cautious opposite of herself. It means adding accountability to the qualities she already possessed. The climax distributes action according to the character's established strengths. Rick handles immediate physical threats and works to free Evelyn. Jonathan operates the recovered book, but his success depends on Evelyn identifying what must be read. Ardith holds back the supernatural forces surrounding the ritual. No single form of competence is enough. Survival, translation, improvisation, and inherited knowledge finally cooperate rather than compete. Jonathan's role is particularly revealing. The brother who often treats artifacts as opportunities is entrusted with a book whose use can determine the outcome. His comic uncertainty remains, but it no longer prevents meaningful contribution. The film does not ask him to become as scholarly as Evelyn or as physically capable as Rick. He becomes useful by listening, acting, and accepting direction when the situation exceeds his understanding. The ritual's partial restoration of Ankh-Sunamun exposes the emptiness inside Imhotep's dream. What returns is not developed as a person who can evaluate centuries of absence and freely choose the relationship again. The revived figure functions within the ritual's violent purpose. Imhotep has recovered form and motion, but not the mutual life he imagined. Restoration produces an imitation shaped by his command. This is also one of the ending's limitations. Ankh-Sunamun receives little independent perspective. Her ancient choice established the tragedy, yet the climax uses her mainly as the object of Imhotep's desire and as a threat to Evelyn. A fuller version of the theme would allow her restored consciousness to confront the difference between remembered love and present reality. Instead, the film proves Imhotep wrong through failed ritual and heroic resistance rather than through her autonomous refusal. Evelyn's instructions allow the Golden Book to turn ancient power against the ritual and strip Imhotep of his immortality. This is the decisive answer to the film's knowledge problem. The solution is not greater physical force. Rick can confront Imhotep only after Evelyn's interpretation changes the conditions. Scholarship does not replace action, and action cannot succeed without scholarship. Their partnership becomes structural rather than merely romantic. Once Imhotep becomes mortal, Rick can defeat him. The physical confrontation is direct, but its meaning has already been determined by the book. Imhotep loses not because his desire was less intense than Rick's affection for Evelyn. He loses because ancient knowledge removes the power that allowed his desire to ignore every limit. Mortality returns time, consequence, and vulnerability to someone who tried to place himself outside all three. His final response preserves a trace of tragedy. The movie does not ask the audience to mourn the harm he caused, but it allows us to see the collapse of the belief that sustained him. He had treated death as an interruption that could be overcome through sufficient power. His defeat forces him back into the ending he refused. The horror is not only that he dies again, it is that restoration failed to produce the past he imagined. This supports the counter-reading that Imhotep is the thematic center. His defeat resolves the story's argument about desire that cannot change, yet Evelyn remains the moral center because she demonstrates the alternative. She also crosses boundaries and refuses passive acceptance, but consequence can alter her purpose. Imhotep interprets change as an enemy. Evelyn turns change into instruction. The mirrored romances reach their answer at the same time. Imhotep's love seeks to make the present obey a fixed memory. Rick's love for Evelyn develops through increasing recognition of who she is. He does not need her to stop being scholarly, awkward, determined, or dangerous to his peace. He learns to value the entire combination. She does not need him to become refined or intellectually similar to her. Their affection grows through difference that remains visible. Touch therefore changes meaning across the film. In the prologue, touch creates evidence of forbidden possession. Imhotep later approaches Evelyn through the needs of a remembered relationship and a ritual that denies her freedom. Rick's physical protection can risk becoming another form of control, but the climax avoids that result by making Evelyn's knowledge essential. He can reach her, he cannot complete her part of the solution for her. Benny completes the darker survival path while the others confront the ritual. He uses the chaos to collect treasure, treating the collapse of every alliance as an opportunity for private gain. His action is consistent rather than suddenly villainous. From the beginning, he has interpreted danger according to what can be traded, escaped, or taken. Hamunaptra offers one final chance to choose people over possession, and he chooses possession. When he triggers the city's collapse and becomes trapped with the treasure, the film delivers the clearest form of pulp justice. The light disappears, the chamber closes around him, and the approaching swarm confirms that his accumulated wealth cannot create an exit. The sequence is brief and severe, but its meaning is simple. Benny finally encounters a situation in which adaptability cannot substitute for loyalty. The contrast with Rick is complete. Both men are improvisers, both understand fear, both survive the earlier destruction of their unit. Rick's increasing attachment places limits on self-preservation. He returns to danger because Evelyn, Jonathan, and the wider consequences matter more than escape. Benny treats every limit as something to evade until he has no relationship strong enough to bring anyone back for him. Hamunaptra's destruction appears to close the boundary that Evelyn opened, but it does not restore the original order. People have died, Imhotep has returned and been defeated, the Guardians have been exposed, and the surviving characters carry knowledge that cannot be buried with the city. Containment is achieved through collapse rather than understanding. The immediate threat ends, while the ethical questions remain above the sand. The final departure deliberately releases the pressure. Rick, Evelyn, and Jonathan leave with Ardith's respect and with their relationship changed by what they survived. The adventure does not end on grief, institutional accountability, or a long consideration of everyone harmed. It returns to romantic movement. This is consistent with the movie's tonal promise, though it also confirms how quickly consequence can be converted back into pleasure. The treasure loaded onto the camels provides the last complication. The heroes do not deliberately remain in the collapsing city to seize it. Benny gathered the wealth, and they inherit it without initially recognizing what they carry. One interpretation sees this as a moral distinction. Greed isolates Benny, while courage and loyalty receive an accidental reward. The movie grants treasure to people who finally chose one another instead of treasure. A less generous interpretation sees the ending retreat from its own criticism. After showing how foreign intrusion, competition, and possession awaken disaster, the film still sends its heroes away with riches removed from the site. The reward restores the fantasy that buried wealth is ultimately available to the right adventurers. Responsibility matters, but the genre wants to keep the prize. Both readings are supported. The comic discovery preserves buoyancy and avoids making the conclusion feel punitive. It also reveals that the mummy is more committed to adventurous satisfaction than to a consistent critique of extraction. The film can question greed as an individual vice while leaving the broader ownership fantasy largely intact. The library collapse now finds its full echo. Evelyn's first attempt to correct a small instability produces a chain reaction too large to stop. At Hamunaptra, she again initiates a sequence that exceeds her control. The difference lies in what happens afterward. In the library, she stands inside the disorder she created. In the larger story, she develops the knowledge and relationships necessary to participate in repair. The pattern repeats, but her response matures. Ardith's early framing also resolves. The apparent obstacle becomes a surviving witness, who can recognize that the outsiders have finally accepted the responsibility they once ignored. Dr. Bay's concealed guardianship, the dual books, the neutral key, Benny's shifting language, Rick's environmental awareness, and Imhotep's fixed gaze all converge on one distinction. Power is less important than the ability to revise what power is for. The ending answers the deep view question without removing its contradiction. Evelyn's curiosity unleashes danger because she initially confuses access with understanding. It makes the adventure worth following because the same curiosity remains capable of learning, cooperating, and correcting. The film does not argue that knowledge is safe. It argues that refusing knowledge cannot solve what knowledge has already changed. That answer is emotionally satisfying, but not morally complete. Evelyn accepts responsibility, yet other people absorb consequences that her personal growth cannot repay. Imhotep's grief gains dimension, while Anksunamun receives limited agency. Ardith is proved right, but his culture remains secondary to the visitor's adventure. Benny's greed is punished, while the heroes leave with treasure. The movie recognizes several contradictions and resolves them through momentum more readily than reflection. What the film fully earns is the partnership between curiosity and survival. Evelyn is not valuable despite causing the problem, and Rick is not heroic simply because he can fight. She becomes valuable because she turns knowledge toward repair. He becomes heroic because survival expands into responsibility for others. Their romance works because each person's strength remains incomplete without the other's way of seeing. The Mummy ultimately earns its pleasure more convincingly than its depth. Its central design is coherent, its characters are legible, and its craft repeatedly turns opening, reading, touching, and entering into meaningful actions. The deeper questions about cultural access and unequal consequence remain only partially examined. Yet the film does create an argument beneath its spectacle. The past becomes dangerous when desire treats it as property, and curiosity becomes worthwhile when discovery accepts an obligation to the living. The image that remains is Hamunaptra becoming visible in the morning light. Before that moment, the city exists as rumor, map, memory, and warning. Then the desert seems to release it. Ruins occupy the space that looked empty, the score gives the discovery emotional scale, and the competing riders briefly become secondary to the place they have reached. Nothing supernatural needs to attack. The simple fact that the city is there feels like a reward. That image remains because it contains the movie's central contradiction before anyone understands it. Hamunaptra is beautiful because it was hidden and dangerous for the same reason. The boundary that preserved its mystery also preserved the threat inside it. Evelyn sees confirmation that her intelligence and persistence have led somewhere real. Ardith sees the beginning of a failure his people have spent generations preventing. The audience is given Evelyn's wonder before it is asked to accept Ardith's fear. Knowing the consequences does not make the reveal less attractive, it makes the attraction more revealing. The city still looks worth approaching even after we understand what entering it will cost. That response is one of the film's most successful achievements. It does not lecture the audience about reckless curiosity from a safe moral distance. It lets us desire access and then makes us live with the implications of that desire. The score contributes to the tension by refusing to treat arrival as a mistake. It grants the travelers a moment of genuine accomplishment. If the music had announced only danger, the ethical judgment would be easy. The expedition would look foolish, and the viewer could remain superior to it. Instead, the film recognizes why people cross boundaries. Discovery can be thrilling before it becomes harmful. Good intentions and authentic wonder do not prevent consequence. That leads to the human question the film leaves open. When something hidden can be reached, does the desire to understand it create any right to enter? Curiosity often presents itself as neutral because it seeks information rather than obvious possession. Yet access changes whatever is accessed. A sealed archive, protected site, private memory, or unresolved history may contain knowledge while also carrying obligations to people beyond the person asking the question. Evelyn initially treats the ability to read as evidence that reading should happen. Her growth begins when she discovers that comprehension is not permission. The film does not ask her to become less intelligent, less curious, or less willing to disturb certainty. It asks whether she can remain curious after accepting that knowledge has consequences she does not control. Her answer is imperfect but active. She uses the same gift to repair what her confidence released. Imhotep leaves the opposite afterimage. He has perfect certainty about what the past should become. There is no curiosity in his return because he is not asking what remains possible. He has already decided what must be restored and what everyone else may be required to sacrifice. Evelyn's danger comes from opening a question without sufficient restraint. Imhotep's danger comes from preserving an answer beyond the point where it can recognize another person's life. The movie grows after reflection because this contrast is more coherent than its rapid pace initially suggests. Books, keys, maps, bodies, thresholds, and performances all participate in the argument. The romance is connected to it. Rick and Evelyn learn to revise their understanding of each other, while Imhotep's relationship with memory cannot change. Even the comedy supports the design by showing how different personalities respond when control disappears. The film also shrinks in important ways. Its moral concern remains personal where the consequences are wider. Evelyn learns responsibility, but the story cannot return what other people lose. Ardith's judgment is validated without receiving equal narrative space. Egypt remains more fully imagined as a site of foreign adventure than as a living culture with its own competing voices. The movie recognizes trespass while continuing to enjoy the fantasy that makes trespass exciting. Reflection also exposes how often momentum protects the characters from emotional weight. Threatening events raise the stakes, but the film quickly restores banter and movement. That rhythm is central to its entertainment, yet it prevents some consequences from becoming more than narrative signals. The adventure wants danger to feel serious without allowing seriousness to dominate the experience. The afterimage therefore carries both admiration and resistance. Hamunaptra's reveal demonstrates how confidently the film can combine design, music, scale, and character desire. It also demonstrates the limitation of that confidence. The city is made irresistible through a perspective that does not fully question who is allowed to experience it as a reward. The restrained answer to the deep view question is that Evelyn's curiosity makes the adventure worth following because it is capable of change. Curiosity alone is not heroic. Its value appears when discovery becomes responsibility and when the person who opened the door refuses to leave others with the cost. The danger begins with Evelyn's assumption that understanding will follow access. The hope comes from her willingness to keep learning after that assumption fails. That brings me to the final measure. My personal score for The Mummy is 5.2 out of 10. That score is not an objective calculation, and it does not deny the film's popularity, craft, or entertainment value. It reflects the distance between how effectively the movie creates momentum and how incompletely it develops the ideas beneath that momentum. There is substantial skill on screen, but the experience does not consistently turn that skill into character depth, emotional consequence, or cultural perspective. Its greatest achievement is tonal coordination. Horror imagery, romantic chemistry, broad comedy, physical adventure, and digital spectacle regularly occupy the same sequence without destroying one another. The film understands that tone is not determined only by subject matter. It is created through timing, reaction, music, framing, and the audience's relationship with the characters. Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz are central to that success. Rick and Evelyn possess different kinds of competence, and the film allows attraction to grow through recognition rather than instant compatibility. Their performances keep the story human when the effects become large. John Hannah gives the ensemble comic movement without making Jonathan entirely irrelevant, while Arnold Vosloo preserves emotional purpose within a role that could have become only a visual threat. Jerry Goldsmith's score and the physical presence of the environments also deserve significant credit. The music grants sincerity to a movie that could easily have hidden behind irony. The sets, objects, costumes, and landscapes give the digital imagery something tangible to interrupt. Even when an effect has visibly aged, the surrounding craft often preserves the intended scale and movement. The limitation that most affects the score is the film's preference for immediate readability over meaningful complexity. Supporting characters frequently serve as warnings, victims, guides, rivals, or comic functions before they feel like complete people. The cultural framing reduces Egypt to a romanticized field of mystery, while the foreign protagonists receive the fullest freedom to discover, fail, learn, and leave with the reward. The rapid emotional resets deepen that limitation. Serious consequences can become fuel for the next pursuit before their human impact has settled. This keeps the adventure light enough to sustain comedy, but it also makes the threat feel selectively real. The movie asks the audience to register danger, without always giving that danger enough emotional space to matter beyond the current set piece. A score of 5.2 therefore sits slightly above the midpoint because the film is functional, energetic, and often charming, but not fully satisfying as a complete dramatic argument. I respect its control of genre more than I connect with its treatment of consequence. Someone else may reasonably value chemistry, momentum, and atmosphere more heavily and place it much higher. Personal taste determines how much the film's buoyancy compensates for its simplifications. The audience most likely to value The Mummy enjoys old-fashioned adventure, supernatural spectacle, romantic friction, clear heroes, expressive villains, and comedy delivered inside danger. Viewers who miss blockbusters built around charismatic ensembles rather than densely connected mythology may find its directness refreshing. Its willingness to be sincere about romance and adventure remains one of its most appealing qualities. Viewers seeking sustained horror may find the jokes too protective. Anyone looking for careful archaeology, historical depth, or a nuanced Egyptian perspective has a fair reason to resist the film's fantasy. Those who prefer tightly governed supernatural rules or emotionally detailed supporting characters may also feel that momentum repeatedly substitutes for development. As a recommendation, it is selective rather than universal. The scale, landscapes, score, and action would benefit from a cinema screen, especially for an audience already fond of its style. For a first-time viewer uncertain about broad late 90s adventure, streaming is the more suitable choice. The movie reveals its personality quickly enough for that viewer to know whether the mixture works. Its rewatch value is stronger than the score alone might suggest. The central plot offers few major surprises once known, but performance timing, background comedy, object movement, and the mirrored relationships remain visible on repeat viewing. A rewatch can also sharpen the film's limitations, particularly the unequal distribution of perspective and consequence. It rewards attention, though not every discovery improves the judgment. The final verdict is mixed but specific. The Mummy is better constructed than a simple recap of its plot would reveal and less complete than nostalgia sometimes allows. It knows how to produce adventure, chemistry, scale, and tonal momentum. It is less willing to remain with the cultural and emotional costs its own story raises. The result is an enjoyable genre machine whose deeper design is real, even when that design does not fully overcome its shortcuts. Now the conversation belongs to you. Do you read Evelyn's curiosity as the true center of the film, or is Imhotep's refusal to release the past the deeper force organizing everything around him? The answer changes whether the story feels mainly like an adventure about responsible discovery, or a tragedy about desire turning into possession. And for the honest judgment, does the mixture of horror, comedy, romance, and action still work for you, or do the quick jokes and emotional resets weaken the danger too much? There is no need to defend the movie through nostalgia or reject it because some effects have aged. What matters is whether its particular balance still creates the experience you want from this kind of adventure. Share your interpretation and your own score in the comments. I'm especially interested in whether the sunrise reveal of Hamunaptra feels like a promise, a warning, or both at the same time. If this deeper view gave you a new way to read the film, you can like the video and subscribe for more movie analysis. Until the next journey, keep questioning what the story asks you to admire, forgive, and carry away. Cinema Deep View, look closer, and the movie changes.